One of the most interesting things about this is how Trump can get the media to either attack or defend something simply by either endorsing it or criticizing it, which is a really interesting phenomenon. So China, as far as I can tell, is kind of responsible for this whole thing, and they're really bad actors in overall on a global stage. So Trump said, "I blame China," and then the media rushed to defend China. So I don't know how you defend China, but they've all rushed to defend China. Then Trump said, "I like this thing called hydroxychloroquine," and the media all rushed to attack hydroxychloroquine.
Just why do we see so many support dogs on planes these days? And how is this a window into a much broader phenomenon? Why does Adam Carolla think emotion and woke culture have overtaken logic and reason in America? And why does everything nowadays seem to revolve around President Trump? In this episode, we sit down with comedian Adam Carolla, host of The Adam Carolla Show. He's a New York Times bestselling author, and his newest book is titled I'm Your Emotional Support Animal, Navigating Our All-Woke, No-Joke Culture. This is American Thought Leaders, and I'm Jan Jekielek. Adam Carolla, so great to have you on American Thought Leaders.
Thanks for having me, Jan.
You know, I'm not in the habit of reading comedy, but your book came heavily recommended by actually a number of people. And frankly, you know, I travel a reasonable amount, and I wasn't really familiar. I didn't notice this whole emotional support animal thing that you describe in the opening chapter. I somehow missed it, but it was probably the most hilarious thing I've read in quite some time.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I travel a lot for my business, and I've been noticing more and more dogs on more and more planes. And I kind of thought, what's going on here? I mean, why would you? I just sort of study patterns, and I think in terms of how come, as an example, how come when I was a kid, I never met another kid with a peanut allergy, and then when I became a parent, three-quarters of my kids' friends had peanut allergies? How's that possible? How could that happen in such a short period of time? And then when I flew, when I was 30, there were no dogs at the airport and no dogs on the plane. And by the time I was 50, there was a ton of dogs in the airplane and a ton of dogs at the airport. And I thought, how could this happen physiologically or psychologically? And then I realized, oh, these are just low character people who want to fly with their dog.
So this is very interesting, like a central theme of the book. You know, I'm kind of, by the way, I have to say, you know, I've laughed out loud so many times while reading it, but this is actually a very thoughtful book on a number of issues that I actually think are quite important to society in general. And one of the themes that comes through, I think, throughout is the idea of toughness and kind of America or society at large losing something very important, toughness, basically.
Yeah. Well, everything, it used to come with the territory in that it's interesting. So I have a 14-year-old son, and I'm in the process of trying to sort of toughen him up through, hard work and some discipline and delayed gratification and that sort of thing. So when I grew up, we didn't have to simulate a world where I got tough. My world was tough. So when we all grew up, and there was an earlier day when I rode my bike everywhere, and my parents wouldn't drive me anywhere, and there wasn't much food in the house, and so on and so forth. And so I never got fat. Now I live in 7,000 square feet with 4 air conditioning zones and a double wide fridge filled with food. So I have a rowing machine in my gym, and I have to simulate this activity of this movement like a treadmill. Um, we have to simulate this in the toughness department now too, because kids don't have adversity. Everything is digital. Grubhub's bringing food to the house. There's no There's air conditioning. They're wearing a helmet everywhere they go. They're not having to fix their own car, chop their own wood, or pluck their own chicken. So we have to kind of instill it now. We have to kind of simulate it. We have to kind of create a gravity and a zero gravity environment.
Something else that's happening now, and this didn't make it into the book because I guess you had to press publish, right? Is this whole, riots in the streets, toppling of statues, all of this stemming from the protests that followed this terrible, terrible death of George Floyd. I think it's over a month ago now. Your book and your thinking has a lot to say about this, as far as I can tell. What are your thoughts on what's happening now with, frankly, I'll mention it specifically because George Washington being toppled and Frederick Douglass being toppled?
Well, obviously, they're acting like what a mob does. What a mob does is they get out of control, and then they're all sort of id and visceral, and they just go out and do. It's like when I live in LA during '93 when we had the riots, people were screaming, "You're burning down Black-owned businesses in your own community." And it didn't matter because we're just burning things down. There's no rhyme or reason to it. They say, "Here's why we're rioting." And when they say, "Here's why we're rioting," they have a point to some degree. They go, "We are rioting because of this brutal cop taking the life of this citizen." And you think, okay, that's why you're rioting. But then you start burning down Black-owned businesses, attacking random people walking in the street, stopping random cars and punching and dragging out the drivers of those cars, and pulling down statues of people who were laying the groundwork for your movement 150 years ago. And of course, it doesn't make sense. Now you've jumped the shark. You become a random angry mob. You're now just running down the street. If you see a stray puppy, you're going to kick it. That's not going to solve anything. That's not going to fix anything. That's what random mobs do.
Talk about in the book about the death of authority. This seems like the death of authority to me.
Yeah, I think authority is established in the home by the dad. And many families now don't have dads. A higher and higher percentage don't have the father in the home. So there's no authority in the home. So they don't really have a relationship with authority. And this crosses the spectrum of male and female and black and white. I mean, I've seen, how many images have we seen of 23-year-old blonde-haired girls screaming their lungs out at the cops? And I always think to myself, boy, that chick hates her dad. God, she hates her dad. That's not someone who has a good relationship with her dad. You have a good relationship with your dad's present, your dad sets some boundaries, your dad is the voice of authority in the house, then you don't go out, find authority, and push against it. So that's essentially what they're doing. They more and more families, American families, are missing a dad. I mean, statistically, it's pretty alarming that where we were 30 years ago and where we are today, the lack of authority, the lack of the father figure is going to screw up the relationship with authority. It's also going to make the kids angry, the people angry, and then they're going to go out and find what they perceive to be the authority and push back against it. And that's where you get all those idiots screaming at cops. The cops are random guys who get 50 grand a year to stand there and try not to let the city burn down. I don't know why you're screaming your lungs out at them.
So this kind of suggests that a lot of what's happening out there today has nothing to do with logic, has everything to do with feeling. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, it is. It is. I mean, well, look at it. Look at it this way. You hear these. They interview the mayor of Oakland. She's having a press conference 2 weeks ago. She's explaining that even though she's aware that the hoops hanging from the trees in the park in Oakland were not, in fact, nooses, but were, in fact, put up by a black gentleman so that people could exercise in the park. Even though she's aware of all that information, she's still moving ahead with her investigation. She's still going to contact the FBI. She's going to treat it like a hate crime. And she then suggested to us that we needed to move forward with the presumption of guilt. She's obviously not using logic. I hear these people talk and they sound dumb, quite frankly, but they're not dumb because a lot of them have advanced degrees and are attorneys and things like that. They've lost logic. They become unmoored. I mean, they're not. I don't know what's. I hope it's just some nefarious. We have our public health director, Barbara Ferrer, was warning us about walking. She was explaining that she was very worried about walking on the beach. That was a big concern of hers. This virus isn't spread by walking on the beach. I turn on CNN, they're worried about people laying down on the beach.
You know, the title of your book is Navigating the All Woke, No Joke Culture. I hope I got that right. It strikes me that a lot of this has to do with the woke, in quotes, ideology, right? Which is something that you've talked extensively about.
Yeah. Well, I think they're all trying to virtue signal. I'm assuming that the problem is the signal that they're really sending is their incompetence. So they're up there and they're talking about the pandemic, and then they're explaining how it affects the LGBT community and people of color and Latinx, and they're virtue signaling, which is fine, but they should do it on their own time, because I'm seeing an incompetent person who's worried about how somehow this affects the gay community more than the straight community. I don't even know what the science or the logic is behind what they're doing. But when you virtue signal, understand there's a small part of society that will applaud that, and like many of my colleagues in Hollywood, but a larger percentage of America will think you're an idiot.
You know, you talk about this idea, and I highlighted a whole bunch of things in your book because I thought there were some really great lines. And this is the one that comes to mind, that you need to be logically consistent, not logically convenient.
Well, that's what happens. I mean, you hear these people and they say, CNN says, stay in, shelter at home, don't leave the house. You can leave the house if it's an emergency, but don't get out of the car, blah, blah, blah. Then 10 minutes later, there's hundreds of thousands of people packed into streets and public squares fighting with cops. And then they're explaining to you why that's okay. So the same network that's been telling you to hide under your bed, and that if somebody brings food to your house, you have to spray it down with rubbing alcohol and wipe it down, and then wear gloves and don't touch the guy and put a mask on, now is showing tens of thousands of people with their arms, arm in arm, marching down the city streets and sometimes getting into shouting matches and physical altercations with each other and the police. And then they're explaining to us why that's necessary. So that is not consistent. If they said hide under your bed for 3 months and then said these people out marching and rioting and taking to the streets, that's extremely dangerous and those people should go home. Then I would I would say, well, that's consistent. But they're not, and they're using their science as they want to use their science. And then as soon as those people went home, then the other people came out and said, well, it's the 4th of July. We're going to have a pool party. And then CNN explained to us how dangerous the pool party was. So they went from don't leave the house to it's okay to leave the house to it's not okay to leave the house in a course of 10 days. And I now think they're lying.
Well, it's very, very difficult these days to make sense of, Adam, even a lot of the data and interpreting the data. We've kind of gone through, even from the experts, we've gone through all sorts of permutations of advice and what you should do, and going 180 as well. So it's kind of a big mishmash, and we're sort of at the point, I think, where people are just deciding based on the best thing they can come up with.
Well, ultimately, it's going to boil down to who do you know who's contracted the virus and what has it done to them? So I personally don't know of anyone who's been claimed by the virus. I've heard of people. There's celebrities or notables or someone like that. But if you say to me, who do you know? What friends? What family members? Like, really, let's talk about your world, coworkers. I work with a lot of people. I'm friends with a lot of people. So I know one individual who contracted the virus, and he said his wife was positive, but it didn't affect her. She had asymptomatic, and it passed through him like the flu. And I said, okay, so I do know one person who got it, and it was as if they had the flu. I don't know anyone else who got it. Look, I may be an anomaly. I may be lucky, but I don't know anybody. I've talked to a lot of people. I'm friendly with a lot of people. I have a pretty broad net spread out there in terms of relationships and acquaintances. And I've not really heard of even a friend of a friend. So with that information, I'm just going to move forward with my life. That's me processing the information. I can listen to Fauci. Fauci says don't wear a mask, and Fauci says do wear a mask, and Fauci says, this thing's going to die off in the sunlight. Then Fauci says it's now worse in Florida and Texas than it is in New York. So I'm not sure. Fauci seems to be all over the road. And I don't blame them. They're giving you the information as fast as they get the information, but it's oftentimes wrong. Of course, the models are always super inflated. I've been to Texas. I've been to Nashville. I've done shows. I've traveled. I've been on Southwest flights. I'm fine, and that's how I'm proceeding. If I get it, then I'll get it.
Well, and it is extra difficult, frankly, for the scientific community here in the US, given that the Chinese Communist Party, and this is something we've done a lot of work on, covered up, the reality of the virus, destroyed the evidence of the origin, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All those things that would be incredibly helpful in making these kinds of predictions or assessments were all kind of unavailable or destroyed.
Well, you know what I love? One of the most interesting things about this is how Trump can get the media to either attack or defend something simply by either endorsing it or criticizing it, which is a really interesting phenomenon. So China, as far as I can tell, is kind of responsible for this whole thing, and they're really bad actors in overall on a global stage. So Trump said, "I blame China," and then the media rushed to defend China. So I don't know how you defend China, but they've all rushed to defend China. Then Trump said, "I like this thing called hydroxychloroquine," and the media all rushed to attack hydroxychloroquine. So, as far as I can tell, China started this whole thing and is responsible for this whole thing, and then acted irresponsibly afterward. Hydroxychloroquine may be helpful in treating this. So you have one thing that works, you have another thing that didn't work in China and is very negative, and you have the media defending China and attacking the drug that may prove to be or has proven to be somewhat effective in attacking this disease. That's an interesting phenomenon.
Well, you have in your book, I was just amused at the title of the chapter, frankly, the obligatory Trump chapter. I still am incredibly amused by the even the title. But I'll actually this is one of the things I highlighted. I'm gonna read this just for your benefit here. The Trump derangement crew, and presumably you're talking about Trump derangement syndrome. I imagine everyone watching has an idea of what this is. Doesn't actually have a plan. They're using all the scandals to cover their own ineptitude. You could put up a candidate with good policies, or they could win another way by keeping the noise meter pegged through all 4 years of his term. I thought that was a really interesting observation about this noise meter, because wow, has there ever been a noise meter like I've never seen ever before over the last, 4 or 5 years, right?
Look, first things first. They're trying to win an election, and you can win an election one of two ways. You can focus on what you bring to the table, policies, experience, track record, so on and so forth. I mean, or you can sling mud at the other guy, or you can do it simultaneously, which is kind of what happens. You and I are running for the same Senate seat. I say Jan's bad and I'm great, and you say I'm bad and you're great. And then there's certain roads where the person says, I'm not really going to criticize Jan. That's beneath me. I'm going to just focus on my accomplishments. This is kind of an interesting angle, which is, again, the end game is me being elected. I don't care if, this is a pool game and I want to win the pool game. Now, I could either run the table and win, or you could run the table and at the end scratch on the 8 ball and I would win. But either way, as long as I win, right? And so this is a version of I, in concert with the media, can make so much noise for so long and call everything divisive and call everyone a race baiter and we'll do so much of that by the end of this first term, people are just going to want relief. They're just going to want it to stop. As a parent, we've all been there. As a parent, that sort of thing where your kid is saying, "Can I have a donut for breakfast?" And you go, "No, you don't have a donut for breakfast. Let me make you eggs." And they're arguing, and then you hear them arguing to wine. And at a certain point, you run in the kitchen and you yell, "Just eat the damn donut. Just eat the donut. I can't take it anymore." And you go back to your office. So America may do that with the election. They just go, just vote Biden in. I can't take it anymore. I don't want to hear it anymore. I can't turn on CNN and hear the soliloquies about racism anymore. We got to move on. So I put that theory together about 2 years ago, and I kind of feel like that's where we're heading.
It's kind of hard for me to fathom because, I mean, the only thing I know is that the noise meter is going to increase at least until November. I mean, that's based on what we've seen up to now. That's what I would expect. And I think, frankly, Adam, I appreciate your perspective on this because you're not particularly a huge fan of the president in the first place. You just like to call it like you see it, which is great. And this is another thing that I'm kind of wondering to myself about with the folks that have the so-called, Trump derangement. Like you were describing, everything is categorically, if Trump does it, it's wrong. Hydroxychloroquine, Trump likes it, must be bad, right? China, all this evidence must be good, or I don't know if it's quite gone that way. I don't know if it's entirely gone that way, but yeah.
If you really study hydroxychloroquine, and I've talked about it quite a bit with Dr. Drew, who's prescribed millions of tablets of this, and other doctors, if you really just take that one subject, this is a drug that has been around for more than 50 years and is totally ubiquitous. Everyone who travels to a third world nation may take it. There's people who've been on it for decades. You couldn't find, it's almost inert. Like there's just it's like coming out against salt or aspirin. I mean, literally, I've said to Dr. Drew, it's like coming out against aspirin. And he said, no, aspirin has more side effects. Or more of my patients have difficulty with aspirin than they do with hydroxychloroquine. So what's the situation? Well, so what's driving this psychologically? What's going on? Well, the person they hate said it might prove to be effective. That's all. He just said it might be effective. He's not a doctor. He heard that it might be effective. And it turns out it is effective. So this should be a non-news story. They mounted up a campaign. I heard doctors and senators and pundits explaining that this was, playing Russian roulette with your health. And then I would talk to Dr. Drew and I would say, what is going on? And he'd say, I don't know. This is nothing. People have taken millions of these tablets. There is no side effects. There is no danger. And then I'd turn the news back on and they'd have another. I mean, they had I think it was a congressman or a senator. I can't remember, but he was on The View and he said, yeah, I'm on it. I tested positive for COVID and I'm on it. And Joy Behar started screaming at him, you're going to kill yourself. What are you doing? And I thought, what happened to your brain? What's going on? And then I realized I think Joy Behar watches too much CNN. But if you take that one subject, that's all you need to know. This should have been a zero burger and a non-conversation. I mean, the president said this may prove to be effective, and the entire media should have went, let's look into that, or let's find that out. And then there's been a bunch of studies, and it turns out it seems to be somewhat effective when taken in concert with zinc and zithromycin or something like that. But there should have never been a campaign against hydroxychloroquine. I mean, I've heard doctors call the pharmacist and get it prescribed and have the pharmacist argue with them. And doctors say that's never happened before. Why there's a pharmacist arguing with me? I'm trying to prescribe this to a patient. I mean, that's how effective and politicized it's been. It should have never been politicized. There's nothing there. I mean, if you don't think that that's what's going on, look no further than hydroxychloroquine.
So, Adam, what is the connection between the media and the all woke culture, or let's say the big media and the all woke culture?
One side of the culture is feeding it, and that's CNN and MSNBC and Los Angeles Times, New York Times, whatever mainstream media. They're feeding it The other part of the culture, which is big business, they're running from it, but they're trying not to be consumed by it. So they're pretending to be down with the cause and down with the movement so they don't get consumed by it, chewed up and spat out. They're scared. So one side is feeding that group and the other side is trying to make concessions and deals with it so not to be consumed by it or ruined by it.
You know, it's interesting. People have commented that this is, a rare revolution that's supported by the big corporate sector, right?
Yeah, well, they don't support it in terms of they don't believe in it. They're just some big, Nike doesn't believe in anything. They want to make money. I mean, they don't care about the movement. They're trying to figure out a way to profit from the movement or not be destroyed by it.
All right, is this going to work out positively for them in your view?
It's good short term. It's good for CNN short term. It's good for Nike short term. I don't think it's good long term for either one of them. 10 years ago, if somebody would have said to me, did you hear what CNN said? Did you hear the story about what the president said on CNN? I would have went, oh my God, what did the president do? Or what happened on CNN? Or who's a racist? What? There's some NBA executive who's a racist or whatever it is on CNN. If I hear, did you hear what CNN said about almost anything now? I go, let me investigate. Let me see what the real story is, right? All right, your news outlet. And now when you tell half the country, hey, did you hear the story on CNN? They go, all right, hold on. Let me invest. Let me look into this because that's probably not what happened. That's a bad sign when you do news for a living. And Nike and all these woke corporations, people have sort of see through them and realize that they're just posturing to try to make money.
Adam, any final words before we finish up?
Thank you. Thanks for reading the book. And thank you for being so thorough.
Well, Adam, such a pleasure to have you on.
Thanks, Jan. Appreciate it.